Folks, can we encourage you to take your seats, please? That's my OCD kicking in. Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for coming along again this morning. For those that weren't here yesterday, my name's Paul Martin. I'm the Deputy Principal at the University of the West of Scotland. Lorraine and I don't have any scheduled dance routines this morning, but for those going to the gala dinner this evening, maybe, just maybe, she's trying to hide, but I'll find her. So welcome back to today's conference. We've got a packed day. I think those that were able to attend the civic reception at the Paisley Abbey appear to enjoy themselves, and we're very, very grateful to the Paisley Opera Society for their entertainment last night, and many of the best wishes we will pass back to the group. It's a group of amateur singers, and my view is they were absolutely fantastic. So again, some general housekeeping. Gala dinner this evening is for ticket holders only. Return transport from the Paisley campus is at 6:30 at the front of the campus at reception there, and we'll return there for about 11:30 this evening. If you have accommodation in Glasgow, please just make your own way up to the Kelvin Grove. A reminder that there are no fire alarms during the day, so if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building using the nearest fire exit, and colleagues will help you with that. Refreshments will be available in all the rooms: tea, coffee, water, and there's water on your seats today should you need it. Lunch will be available in the hub, and can I remind you also that the Makers Market is on there until 2 o'clock, and posters are available as well, and we appreciate you taking the time to look at those posters. A judging session will be happening today, and awards for the best poster will be made tomorrow. Again, if you've got any issues with your IT, logging on to the apps or onto EduRoam, please just give us a shout. Anybody with a t-shirt? I've had mine physically removed this morning. Apparently I wasn't good enough at the job. So my colleagues have removed my t-shirt. So if you see anybody with a t-shirt, please just contact them and they'll keep you right. Again, remind you, computers in the McLean corridor have been unlocked, so you can use those at your leisure if you need to go on and book tickets, etc. And there are computers with printers in the hub as well. Finally, three further points. Walking tours of Paisley, I think you'll need an umbrella and a strong coat, are available today, and again are in your programme, and you gather at the main reception. Sandy Stoddart, so the Queen's Sculptor in Residence, has an open studio from 12 till 2. Sandy's a fascinating character, and we're delighted to have him as part of the university, and he looks forward to welcoming you to his studios. And again, to remind you that the exhibition from Paisley Threadmill Museum is up on the top floor of the atrium, so just the stairs as you go out here. If you go up there, please take the time to have a look at that. Okay, I'm looking at my colleagues just to make sure I'm thumbs up, that's fine. So, now on to the main programme. It's our pleasure, indeed it's an honour, to welcome Dame Ruth Silver to address us this morning. Dame Ruth is the founding president of the Further Education Trust for Leadership. She's currently the co-chair of the Skills Commission. Dame Ruth chaired the Scottish Government's Independent Commission on Widening Access, a Blueprint for Fairness. Ruth's knowledge and experience are hugely recognised and respected across the UK and indeed around the world. It's a great honour for us to welcome Dame Ruth today, so please welcome her to the platform.
Good morning, colleagues. Can I ask you a favour? Will you all breathe out so that warm air will come towards me, because I'm freezing standing here. Thank you. I've got to check my clicker. It's got a wee R upside down. Okay. Listen, Paul, thank you very much, and to the principal as well for inviting me to come here today. I'm delighted in a weird kind of way, because these things are scary. But actually, I wanted to be here because the last time I was here was a Saturday morning, as wet as this, and I was invited not by the leadership in the university, but by the National Union of Students. And I did something that I don't understand, which is called trending. So I was having a great time with the students. I mean, they were just smashing and telling me all the things I should be telling the government to do. And then actually from the back of the room, one of my students, an ex-student from London, a young black woman, came charging down shouting my name. So I trended here, I found a long-lost daughter, and it has personal meaning for me as well. So thank you very much for asking me. So I am really happy to be here with you for those reasons. And I'm happy to be here, particularly at this university, because it's famous for its work in widening access. And I'm happy to be here with this principal, because this principal chairs the Teaching and Learning Group at University Scotland, and gave me a hard time when I first met him. But we recognised in one another a kind of dignified defiance, well, mostly dignified, actually fighting for things for learners, not with one another. And we have grown to be respectful and actually fond of one another. So let me just say, being here, being with you, with a reputation of trending, I think is a smashing start for me. I want to say a wee bit about my task this morning and to say something about Keynote. I've done a lot of Keynote things in my life, but this one made me think, and I thought, how's a Keynote different from standing up and telling people what to do? And here's my proposition to you, that actually, and I hope this is my ambition for this morning, that a Keynote leaves people with keys, actually unlocking some thinking. It's not for me to tell you what to do, you are all experts, but actually it's to maybe say a bit that kind of turns a door or turns a thought in your head. So my contribution this morning is to say that. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm here to tell you what I've done and how I did it and why I did it, and just to see if it helps with a wee stuck bit of you or a kind of deeper level of some of your understanding. So that's the sense I make of it. And to kind of take you into that. So I want to share my experience, and I want to do that because that's the invitation came from the principal to say, come up and talk about your experience, talk about your thinking, and any thoughts about how to work for change and in change. So that's what I'm here, and I'm going to try and do it by giving you a kind of case study of the Commission and the kind of things I interfered with, on the basis that actually, well, a very simple other proposition, unless you have a model for change, being involved in changing things is quite often a waste of time. So the preparatory work on what is my model for this change. The bad news is, it's like a taxi driver once told me, he said the thing about being a parent is when you have one kid, you think, oh, I know how to do this. And the second one comes along and it's completely different and nothing works. You're always wearing your L plate. And I think that's how I feel about change. I think I know how to do things and I go in and I have no idea. And that's good news because that transition de-skills you and makes you available for new thoughts, I think, and new thinking. So I want to share my experience, offer my thinking on it, and some reflection on handling change myself. So please wish me luck. So how can you resist an invitation like the one I got? And I said no to at least once. When Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, Prime Minister or President, whatever you call the absolute leader of the country, made a speech in November a couple of years ago, this 2015, that said that I determine that a child born today in one of our most deprived communities will, by the time he or she leaves school, have the same chance of entering university as a child born in one of our least deprived communities. The invitation from that speech came in March 15, and I had 10 months to do the work and then do the report and get that going. And I remember cursing that, but actually the gift of it, the gift in this, was the speed and the sincerity of it brought a great authority. Some arguments I've had in other HE inquiries that lasted a couple of years just went on and on and on. There was no chance. You had one crack at having an argument, and then we moved forward. The report is called A Blueprint for Fairness. You have to read it. You have to read it because actually it's the work of myself, 12 commissioners, a secretariat from the civil servants, some free research from everybody, and fabulous colleagues like the principal here and the principal in colleges and schools and early years who just gave me time continually. So just to say that in June 2016, the report was accepted by the Scottish Government. I handed it in March. The elections then hit the streets. We came back together again, and to have all your recommendations accepted, I still can't believe it. We were all completely delighted by that. I just want to say a bit, and I'm hoping if it works, that as I speak, you will see some of the things that might be useful for you and change. But I owe you some explanations of some of that. So let me just remember to do this. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? So how do I position myself? Widening access needs wise activists. And by wise, I mean knowledgeable, academically well-fed, theoretically well-fed, but in a way that doesn't lose their heart and doesn't argue data with you, rather than looking at some determinations. So that's my first point. Terrific teaching, which has been the story of my life, I've been involved in many curriculum programs, is insufficient on its own. However, it is the heart of the matter and needs to be beyond boundaries, actually, and across boundaries as well. It's absolutely a professional and academic specialism, and it's not social work. I was very surprised that nobody knew how complicated it is to do widening access. It is the most skilled area of teaching and learning for me, and assessment and strategies and outreach and inreach and all of that. It's fabulous. It's the most creative part of teaching for me, and I've worked in universities. But actually, it's the complications of the pedagogy are not understood, I think, and not appreciated enough. To be successful, this is the overarching proposition, at change interventions, a change model must be conceptualised, preferably by the chair in discussion with the commissioners, and then acted upon. It becomes the way of working, the culture of the change group, the whatever that would be. And it must be communicated to all. So let me tell you a wee bit about, I've told you what my intention is. I keep saying that just in case I forget what it is. So actually, I was appointed and then had to find my 12 commissioners, and I planned an induction programme for them. They weren't used to being learners, but it was interesting. And the theoretical framework that I use when I'm working in change is systems thinking. Not just systems analysis, but actually the theoretical backgrounds to systems, how they work, how they can be successful, and kind of the mistakes they make. And the learning theory that I have loved all my life is Kolb's learning theory. I like it for leadership, I like it for teaching, I like it for all the work that goes on. And just to say what it in case it's not known to everybody, Kolb's learning theory is experience, reflection, learning. You do something, you think about it, you learn what worked and what didn't work, and you then do something differently. The shorthand word for that is praxis, not practice, not theory, but that wonderful merger between the two. And psychoanalytic insight. I am a clinical psychologist by training, but because I'm Scottish, I have a literature degree as well. You can do very interesting contradictory things there. So I know about the literature of people, I also know about some of the mechanics. So that's very important to me. I always wonder what behaviour means. And I'll tell you a bit later about what's in my kit bag from my own experience. So my approach that I was able to persuade the commissioners about was to be systemic in our work, to go for an appreciative inquiry in what was happening in Scotland, because there's too much derision around. Nobody sees the wonderful goodness because something isn't right. So I was very clear. I kept at us the behaviour corrective for the committee and in all our visits. And appreciative can mean having a good old argument, but it means arguing for something, not with people. And my stance, personal stance, because I had more time than the others, they had full-time jobs, was to get up close and professional with all the players. From an early age, I spent mornings with mums and babies in creches, right through to academic councils in the universities. And that all our work would be evidence-based. But I allowed a wide definition of what evidence was. Data, absolutely, and some of the research I saw was interesting. But there is the data of the everyday experience of learners who have been excluded, who don't quite believe in themselves, and who think that they'll be discovered any minute as being frauds. So, to which problem was this commission the answer, or an attempted solution? So I wondered, everywhere I go, I live in London, there's great praise for Scottish education, and my daughter came back to study here as well. And so I was quite confused when I first heard about this. Of course, I know about deprivation and exclusion. But in a country where there are no fees for higher education, the ratio of disadvantaged and HE students is making poor progress in the eyes of the politicians. Well, they've never done it, but that's another matter. And they are concerned about that. As they worked hard for independence, as they looked to the changing world, they knew that our people were at risk of being further excluded, further poor, and all those things. And what's been interesting from where I sit, this First Minister is very different from the last First Minister. I mean, Craig will know better in the comment, because actually he's an economist and had that frame of thinking, but she really came from wanting people to be involved in the economy that he dreamed of. So it was a very nice progression. I learned, of course, that advantage is as entrenched in Scotland as disadvantaged. Inequality is unfair. This was the position the Commission took. It's unfair. It's not social engineering. It's damaging, and it's unsustainable. And I personally think it's unforgivable. So the view taken was that talent should not be wasted. The government was demanding, and you'll see that the First Minister has promoted the Deputy Minister, as was, and the man in charge of all the money, to be in charge of education. In other countries, that might not be seen as a promotion. But he, the man who does all the thing together, the systemic worker, is now in charge of education in this country, from school through to university. There was also a public desire unmet. More people wanted to go to university, but it's capped in Scotland. But the desire was not just, the desire was inside families. I want my child not to have the life I lived. I want to have chances. You will know that very well. And the other point being is that it's a national value system. In Scotland, I remember this, I taught in some NUM people, actually being well educated is as almost important as having money. Respect comes in two sources, having a posh house or being somebody who can quote Rabbie Burns and Shakespeare. So that value that says actually people who know things are people of value is still palpable. And there's a wee test that I asked the Commission to take care of. It's a fitness test, and it's one I use all the time, which is things have to be fit for purpose, of course, definition of quality, fit for context, definition of equality, fit for place, Scotland, and fit for phase. So one of our inquiries was, what phase is Scotland in? You've heard me describe what went on politically. So very quickly, let me tell you about the working of the Commission itself. I was very clear, I wanted round the table this system itself. I wanted people, experts, leaders from the system. And my invitation was to come round the table, please, and have arguments here. Because you're not representing anybody, but you are a fractal of what goes on in your sector. So 10 months of work, 12 expert members, me, the chair, and a secretariat from the civil service. I had 2 vice-chancellors there, 1 college principal, 1 head teacher, 1 director of education, one person who chaired the Equal Opportunities Committee of the Funding Council, one employer, one early years, one member from the trade unions in education, two colleagues from the National Union of Students, and one researcher from a very respected English research group that works on fairness and widening access to higher education, who joined us and had worked at Number 10. I had known him a long time, and he came up. He's from the Sutton Trust. And if you want to see wise agitation for change, read their papers. They're short, succinct, and they have changed the spine of widening access, certainly in England and further afield. Big links with America too. So again, the philosophy, inequality is unfair, damaging, and unsustainable. Equal access is not about fairness. We were accused of being social engineers and doing all sorts of things, and that wasn't it. It was simply fairness. It's not fair to keep clever people out because they're poor. Equal access is a social and moral good, and all of us work through the lens of that as our culture in the Commission. We saw three phases. When Nicola Sturgeon said, "a child born today," I took her at her word and said, okay, so this baby is now a month old, and we have got 3 5-year plans to get into place so that they get into university. And actually having space, no space to work in, but space to plan for, is such a gift when you're involved in change programs. So we had the 3 phases, we have 5-year plans, and we have 3 sets of targets for those 3-5 years. We developed a culture of collaboration, actually around the table, and I was everywhere, ubiquitous, all over the place. And I have to say that I found the representative bodies that I had been warned about smashing. I mean, they gave me some tough questions, but that's what they're there to do. And they were honest with me, and they told me when I was getting it wrong, and they were right a good percentage of the time. So I really felt the fellowship of that, and I think that was because of the determination of the First Minister and the shortage of time. And I wanted to be clear, to be very attentive to students. So we had the students on our board, and I went and spent time in nearly all of the universities. We were asked by the First Minister to have a focus on young people with a care experience, because there's exclusion and then there's impossibility. And if you've been in care all your life, or adopted and fostered to many places, and you're clever, you have a lot of things missing. And so I'm absolutely delighted to take that on. We had a set of principles. We worked out these principles together as a commission, and we worked by these principles whenever we took ourselves out and about and visitors in. About fairness, respect for one another in difference, evidence-based. I can say more about that if you want to question it. I had a rule as the chair that I held firmly to. This commission will not be dismissible. Nobody will dismiss us. They will challenge us and tell us that it will take longer or we'll need more money. But actually what we recommend will be doable in time, in space, and with politicians on our side. It will be success-focused. We really want it to work, we want it not to be dismissed, and we want to be able to feel and describe the success. And we will work for generativity. I don't know if you know the meaning of that, certainly in relation to education, but for me, who held the thinking of the Commission in my role and authority as chair, I take generativity from the best book I've ever read, I think, called Children and Society by Erickson. American, long and old. And in that he talks about generativity versus despair. He does that kind of dialectic with it. And he says, generativity is you prepare the world for a time when you won't be in it. Now, if you love anybody, you know exactly what that means. And so that notion of generativity, this will last. This will give people stuff to build on. Findings, again, many visits and so on. I was delighted, appreciative inquiry, and we all went to different places and we took different people with us. Led me to conclude in the interim report that Scotland knows how to do access. I've never seen such terrific work. Every place had something exceptional. One university was great at tracking the access students without them knowing. not in a sinister way, but so that you could say, hey, there's this workshop, do you know it's going on? Really keeping their dignity, but bringing them what they needed. And everything, every place I visited had something, but not everywhere had all of it. So there I was, fishing, harvesting the best I could. And there are layers of terrific practice and professionals in the places too. So there's all sorts of great admissions, wonderful marketing, super tutor support, great technology. Enough of the ingredients were there, just all a bit idiosyncratic. And there was very strong leadership in places and not in others. Again, coming back always to the touchstone, fairness, widening access, helping people not as well off as you is a national value. And the desire to deliver from early years through schools, through colleges, through university was there. They had different challenges, but actually I didn't ever get somebody saying, oh, let's, someone did say, well, we don't have scholarship. And I don't challenge that. Universities are not schools. You are not scholarship. But you don't decide without good evidence who's not capable of it. And so, you hear me saying this, my analysis was actually the deficits in widening access is blaming the students not doing the right things. And actually, and some of that's absolutely right. That's curable. Lots of the deficits were in institutions as well. However, and blame is distributed to other people. It's a very interesting wrestling match. Some universities will tell the schools that are failing, and the schools that tell years that are failing, and years that tell kids. The blame is everywhere else except in their own backyard. And the credit, of course, belongs to their particular institution. And so, but that's human. We wonder what behaviour means. It doesn't have to be loved. Very simply, I mean, simply, but it was very clear, shouted out to me, stuck in my skin everywhere I went, that what's wrong, what needs to be better in Scotland is to make all this fabulous thing come together, because it's not systemic. I think Scotland could be one of the first countries in the world to say this is how you do joined up things. And I think it's not that far. And it's particularly why I'm glad that Craig's in charge of this committee that was teaching and learning. It is the heart of it. If it's failed by the other pathway, then we're in trouble. So my model then for working further was to work along the learning pathway. And if I just say quickly what I mean by that, I think it's just my map. You start with pre-entry work. We don't start when they come up and we apply. Go right back to schools, go right back to nurseries as well. There's nurseries in Glasgow where you walk in the door with a teddy bear with a water balloon. It's things in universities, there's children's universities as well. Pre-entry needs particular behaviours in order to build ladders down to people who don't come through our doors. At entry level, you have admissions, you have support and choice, and of course, most of these learners don't have a family tradition saying, I don't do that, I was, they don't know. I didn't know when I went. So, working at entry, working at what I call during, so different phases of during. You come in, what do you need? How do you progress through that? There's a pre-exit phase, an exit phase, and a post-exit phase. And if you chunk those into lovely colours, then you have, I think, a rather excellent foundation for widening access. That's my main point. That's the kind of thinking, and that's how I work, saying, okay. And of course, I have the experts on the table. I set up a group of expert groups in the hand of an expert practitioner. So I asked people from this university, school, to convene, call me for instruction. They got to choose who we brought around there. And the commission set them a question saying, what would you do if you were the world? And actually we had some wonderful working papers from there. They're all archived on the website that we want to publish. So folk doing it, the practitioners, the experts, were able to tell us things we should be thinking about and how to do it. That was a way of testing out is this possible. But I was being sneaky as well, because I knew that I'd be sent on my way after 10 months. And I wanted to leave a cohort of, this is the generative bit, a cohort of experts who could take the work forward, who weren't just the leaders, but who were people from the classrooms, the workshops, and so on, So there exists in Scotland 10 fine groups of people who are waiting to be mobilised, and I'll say a bit more about that in a bit, because they know what they're doing and they know what they're talking about. I'll say something else about care later. Let me say it now. I have never worked with such smoothies as a body I called Who Cares Scotland. It's called Who Cares Scotland. And I went to them to learn how the hell these young people from care, they'd been in care, they were now supported by they supported one another, and they came and did the first induction with the commission. How they had got every MP to adopt Who Cares Scotland. And I asked, I said, tell me about the choreography of that. How did you get these people to do that? Because all of them had a contact, and you've never seen, I mean, I think Jeremy Corbyn may have spoken to them as well, because these young people had targeted an MP, had inducted them, had brought them along. So when I went to talk to people in Parliament, it was relatively easy, because they knew a care learner by name. And they told me how they had inducted the politicians. Let me give you an example. They got their targeted politician to come and meet them where they lived in the morning, to stand with them while they waited for the bus, to see some of the prejudice they faced when they went into the shop to buy fags, and to just be a day in their life. And of course they encountered the no money, the not able to spell, all of those things. So that kind of inverted induction of staff as well as politicians was enough for me to work on the kind of care resolutions that we got through. So, when I was a young person, I learned from somebody very respectable, this quote, which is clumsy in German, and I'll translate it into Scottish for you. It's from systems thinking. Every cause must affect something in order to produce an effect. The state of the thing or process affected is just as important to the outcome as is the cause. And how I explain that to people when I talk, because I find it clumsy, is if you hit a floppy football with a 10-pound kick, it will go there. If you hit it with a firm kick, it will go further. You have to know the state of the football. And actually, we had to know the state of widening access in Scotland. So that was a big piece of research, call for evidence, conferences, and so on. And I think the systems word for that is leverage. This was about leadership. It was about learning commissioners. It was about leverage. And it's that old maxim, isn't it? If you play bridge or poker, lose your losers first. You're never going to win them. But they don't have set up your winners. So that notion from this table of wise people helped us when we felt moments of despair. I'll very quickly say something. I'm going to be allowed extra time, Paul, and I just to kind of say a few more words. So recommendations, 34 recommendations in all, which were far too many, but in 10 months was the best we could do. But we excavated from the list of recommendations 8 foundations. Without these, the rest made no sense, and the other 24 are really just amplifications, if you know that curriculum word, amplifications of how they could be done. So we want this done, and in order for that to happen, it's this, this, and this needs to happen as well. So 8 foundation recommendations. We were very clear that it needed systemic leadership, not just institutional leadership or political leadership. And the recommendation was that there should be a commissioner for fairness, for widening access in Scotland. And that person, a ex-University Vice-Chancellor, was appointed and started work in December 16. So all these recommendations were accepted. It kind of knocked me off my chair. 2 curriculums, so this thing about teaching and learning at the heart of the matter. One was the proposition that Scotland knows how to do this. All the right bits are in Scotland, but gather them together, put them in the pathway shape, make them systemic, and call that the Scottish Framework for Access. So don't specify, learning objectives, but do that, and really boldly. And I think it's in the second 5-year plan. We argued that actually, in time, when Scotland has had a chance to harvest, to filter, to give a rating, I don't mean a mark, but to say this really works, that you then only fund learning that fits with the framework. I'm not frightened of power in that way, but actually unless that has bite, people won't do it. So and I'm not saying don't do what you like to do, please do what you want to do, but you only get paid for the things that move these people on. You're not getting paid for the rest. So that, and that got through. 2 admissions, and that's a challenge for Craig and his committee. 2 recommendations on admissions. There's a lot more underneath that. You can have a look at it. We talked about the need to move towards contextual admissions. 2 people apply to university. One comes from a very posh independent school with tutors and they have teaching on a Saturday. And somebody else, and everybody goes to university from that school. Somebody else comes from a school where nobody went to university before, where they are scraping through grades. And we saw lots of students who told us stories. So don't measure them the same. Look at them from the journey they've made, because that's a declaration of potential. So we got that through as well. We also said give the universities time and space to do this work. People are pretty speedy in Scotland. They want immediate results. And so would I if I were them, but I'm not. So that thing about knowing how to do that was really important. For the people who'd been in care, we asked that they, and the thresholds, of course, the contextual admissions for learners, for the institutions, we said, stop doing this. Stop asking for 5 A's as entry. What do you need for entry? What do you really need? And actually what was great was the honesty of the Vice-Chancellor saying, we're saying we'll take you for 5 A's because it's an easy way to select. But actually what you really need is just maths and English and so on. And again, all of this exists in Scotland. Nothing we asked for doesn't exist already. So that was the second one, that second foundation there. Under care, we said that people who from a care experience presenting for a university should be allowed to enter with the minimum requirements. And that includes, discounting for contextual admissions. So don't ask people who've not had all the things that you're scaffolding of success to be the same as everybody else. And the other thing we said is, and should they drop out, they should be able to return at where they left, or to a right of re-entry, a right of being cared for. We also persuaded Nicola Sturgeon to not, so there's no fees in Scotland, but you have to borrow these days, I think, for support allowance. And I said, don't you dare ask them to borrow money, they can't pay it back. And she said, they will not have to borrow, they can have it by right. Because you'll know what that means. Lots of the students in Scotland work in McDonald's and other places in the evening. So, and then the targets. And the targets are really a punt. And me saying, well, actually, if you get it really together, it could be this, this, and this. So we set targets, but the idea being that you can argue with them. And I'm trying to give space for learning and space for the sector to argue back, but to argue back with evidence, because they think they're giving them all the money. As I say, all of the 34 were accepted in June 2016. I'm going to quickly fly through, probably have gathered it all already, about me a wee bit. So, all that you have, I think, when you are doing this kind of work is what you are as a person. All of it, your bits of paper and all the rest of it. But I have been asked, I did some work with students, so what is my interior, what's the interiority of any chair? And so I was able to identify mine. I'm Scottish, I grew up here. My upbringing and my education, taught me subjects, but they also taught me values and relationships and aspirations. Maybe not be named that, but I looked at my teachers and thought they were just wonderful. Some of them were even good looking as well, so that was very helpful. My father died when I was 15, and the National Union of Mine Workers knocked on my mother's door and said, don't worry about Ruth. We hear she's a clever wee lassie, and we will help her through the union. Now, when that happens, that's really something else, when a community wraps around you. I was well educated. I had the qualifications already, but I went into the university. I used to go in by bus and sit in the back seat and smoke my fags and read the book. and that go back home in the bus. We didn't stay away much from home in Scotland. And I studied clinical psychology because I wanted to know, how do you give people a second chance when their development has been disturbed? Mine had been disturbed by the loss of my father, and the repair of that, my own self-repair and other people. So actually, how do you say to people, okay, let's get on and make it better? And I've been intrigued by that. I specialised in adolescence and transition. And adolescence, I trained at the Tavistock in London. Adolescence, you'll be pleased to hear this, is defined as being from 12 to 25. So some of you may still be there. Because of my political background in the National Union of Mine Workers, my mum was a nurse and we saw many injured miners in our village. There's a theme, isn't there? The spine of Rousseau is about fairness. I became an agitator. I was part of the Women's Equal Opportunities Commission, and I heard many cases. I also went to work in government on young people. When they put the school leaving age, the daft politicians in England didn't change the curriculum, so they had all these kids staying on who wanted to leave and have girlfriends and buy clothes, and they made them do kind of, reading, writing and arithmetic. And of course, I was then working in a clinic and they were being referred. And I wrote and said, this isn't right. And I got invited to work with government. So I spent 7 years in government, working on young people's policies, being with young people, and that was you can see my foundations being laid, I think. And then I discovered colleges. So colleges here, not schools and universities, they are what they are, but colleges are this wonderful, systems thinking terms, the adaptive layer in the English education system. Schools are compulsory, protected by the law. Universities are selective and protected by the Queen. They have the royal charters. Nobody protects colleges. The trade unions used to send all their workers there, and I used to teach night school. I used to teach literature at night school, poems to coal miners, fabulous. And I just think they are the most amazing, creative, prototyping place in the world. So, and that was it. My heart was sold. I became a college principal. I describe them as mezzanine floors, second chance platforms, a rest for people to get on further. And of course, they're the world for second chances. So I think my interiority is at my ripe old age that I've got a wee bit of sense now about how the world works and how to work the world. I fall all over myself all the time and get it all wrong, but that was it. So let me just say a wee bit about my kit bag. So what I brought to the task in my role of chair with the authority to steer the work and thinking and outcomes were the following. As a psychologist, I'd learned to wonder what behaviour means, particularly young people's, because you'll know that any block that a child has in toddlerhood is renegotiated in adolescence. And when you know that, you kind of say, well, it doesn't matter that he can't jump out, whatever. And as a teacher, of course, I had discovered the value of imagery in learning. Teach literature to these folk who worked down the pits and loved it and would say things like, I can quote poems in the dark. I mean, just amazing. Imagery, cuts across lots of gaps in literacy and so on. As a parent, I, of course, learned about the value of connectedness, and connectedness through people linking to one another, holding the space between one another. As a professional, I experience and believe in the power of education. And as a principal of a college, I then had the joy of being a principal of 2 colleges. I'd learned the nourishing value of clarity in structures and systems. Without that, the most ambitious things go awry. People need to be contained in the task, and this one in particular, because it's so difficult. And of course, as a policy maker, I've worked for governments of all colours. And my favourite ones, the one I'm close to, were the hardest to work for because they wouldn't take arguments. But my enemies took arguments really well, so that was fine. Again, as a policy maker, you need to know that actually the wisdom is out there in the practitioners. Don't make decisions without saying, what do you think? What would you do, if you were me? So that's it. I'm going to finish very quickly, I think. Please don't panic, Paul. So it's a lonely place, actually, doing this kind of work. And I used to say, I used it as I spoke to people, but I had 10 things that that nourished me and scaffolded my loneliness as I meandered around in the rain and the wet in Scotland. And I've said what they are. I won't say all of them, you can read them. But the one let me pick up my favourites. Rilke, the poet, in his long poem called the Duomo Elegies, has a fabulous line when he says, "Where you are, a place arises." And what it means is nobody else, that place wouldn't arise. And I knew that. But actually it comes from, there's a weeping infant in a room, and the mother comes to the door. She doesn't enter the room, she just stands at the door, and the child is calmed, because the presence meant something to the child. And I have to remember that. If ever I meet him in heaven, I'm going to, or whatever he is, I'm going to say, I've got a second line for you. What I've learned in my life is that where a place is, a you arises. So I came back to Scotland, having been away for a long, long time. And the me that mobilised, that pulled together those ingredients, I think, surprised me. I knew what to do, I recognised some stuff. So where you are, a place arises. But be open, where a place arises, where a place is, a you arises. The other one, again, it's Bateson, a biologist and systems thinker, when he says, it's difference that makes a difference. Sameness just gives you more of the same. So it wasn't a question of saying, well, let's roll out what Craig does at UWS. Actually, it'll be different in another place. But the kind of the underpinning notion of it really, really matters. The other thing that systems thinking has taught me is dynamic homeostasis. And very simply, that means people work very hard to stay exactly where they are. I could go on. And the Australian Commission on the Future, which I use always with young people, you know, they're waiting for their future to come. I wish I might get started on my future. Actually, the future is not a place you're making. You're going to. It's a place you're making. The future is not somewhere there. It's you. It's you with all your interiority and a learning mindset. Strategic ingredients, okay? So actually, in any change model, and I don't think it's possible without having a model that's explicit and continually talked about, these are that's what's needed. The authorities, Nicola Sturgeon, can't get better than that. Leadership, I have all the definitions of leadership you can imagine. Hetl is all about that. But actually the one that I think is important is that leadership is about winning hearts. You can buy minds. You can instruct hands to do things. You cannot buy a heart. You can't instruct a heart. Clarity of task, learning mindset, appreciative inquiry, systemic expertise. Get the experts around the table and demand they argue. Allies and angels, of course, up close and professional. A map of discretions. What am I allowed to do? What can I not do without having to find a way of doing it? Communications and calendars, a ubiquitous presence. And for 10 months, I really was very shattered at the end. Just being there, but never saying no to anything was important. And to match the determination of everybody else as well. I have a shorthand way of saying that. So actually, I'm never going to remember all the things I just said to you. But one of the things I do is to say, okay, so the art is to identify the following. In all the people you meet and so on, call it equine differentiation. Is this somebody coming in my door with a hobby horse? You know, the same old story? Or is it different? Hey, is that idea a Trojan horse? Is it a clever one, and will it win? Hey, is this proposal a stocking horse? I can get alongside that, even sit in it, and go with it. Does it seed the future? I'm very good at this one. Is it a high horse? Is it somebody on high horse just telling you what they always tell you? Beware of that, because it's prejudice-based. I know better, or whatever. Call it out. Name it. Workhorses. Well, we all need lots of those. So is this a place, you know, full of workhorses who are determined to make a change? And this is a quote from Dickens, of course, the graminivorous quadruped. But actually, the Pegasus bit of that, and some of these words were added by young people I worked with. A Pegasus is really about aiming high. Please aim high with this work, because they do. I just want to read you, honestly, Paul, this is my last bit. Yesterday, and I didn't pay for this, and I'm sure that Craig didn't pay for it either, but the Scottish Funding Council issued the following statement. Sarah Morrison, manager of Scottish Funding Council programme Lift Off, writes today about her optimism for implementing a blueprint for fairness, the final report of the Commission on Widening Access. In her blog, Sarah talks about the enthusiasm and energy generated by the report, and of Sir Peter Scott as Scotland's Commissioner for Fair Access. She also talks about growing recognition for the role of access practitioners. That's my end of term report. Thank you.
I know you think we could be willing to take one or two questions. Right, so Dame Ruth is happy to take one or two questions. If there's any other questions, right.
Can you do the same?
Or you can get me there.
Remember, the presentation's also being live streamed, so it's available on YouTube as well. Okay. Right. We just thank you for the presentation.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Ruth is touching on, and my colleagues are aware, I can be a wee bit OCD in terms of timings and things like that. So what we've now got is a welcome to our colleagues from British Telecom. British Telecom are one of our main sponsors for the event today, and they work very closely in partnership with the University of the West of Scotland over the last year or so, developing our IT infrastructure and again, as Ruth has touched on, beginning to paint a vision for the future in terms of how we can support our students and staff in the different world of higher education. So can you please welcome to the platform Phil Brunkert, who is the Chief Information Officer for BT Public Sector, for a short presentation.
So when you say short, I hope I still have my 15 minutes, yeah? Okay, so I help our public sector customers choose the right technology to help them with their challenges and objectives. I must admit I was a bit surprised when I was asked to present at today's conference on behalf of BT. Why me? I don't know anything about inclusion and diversity in higher education. I'm not an expert. What should I talk about and what might you be interested in? So I thought long and hard about it, and I decided to talk about something I actually know about, and that's teenagers, technology, and teaching technical literacy. So just to help me along, how many people in the audience have teenagers? Great, a good show of hands. So hopefully you'll resonate with some of the things I'm talking about. So here's my three. A handsome bunch, if I say so myself. And I'm pleased to say they're interested in going to university, although I do wonder about my eldest on the far left. But the interesting thing is, just when you got used to millennials, along come Generation Z, and that's those who were born around the turn of the century. So take my three, for example. They were born digital. In fact, my eldest thinks he wasn't born at all. He claims I'm not his dad. Okay, so they grew up with the internet from a really, really early age. It's always been there. They're always and have high expectations for being connected. Boy, do I get an earful if broadband coverage drops, if it goes somewhere with really dodgy Wi-Fi coverage. It's like it's my fault, because I work for BT, So, they have that expectation. And I think you all recognize that in today's modern society, getting your first mobile phone is a key stage in life. Of course, they've all got better phones than me. Okay, and, so technology is at the heart of who they are and what they're about. And it's no different when they come to university. They have high expectations of what technology will be. I'm not going to read out all these numbers, but this is a recent survey, and the figures speak for themselves. Something that BT did recently, we run an annual competition with schools, and it's called Tech Foundation. And what we're trying to do there is to get schools to think about the technology that they want to help their kids with to make them future fit. So rather than just being teenagers who are consuming technology, to get inside how it works, get them interested in design and creativity side of it, because we believe that's an important part of their future. And I think there's lots of reports also with regards to how Generation Z learns. They prefer to do things by doing, and that's in a group and visually, and I'm hoping that resonates with your own experiences. What I also find is that's quite interesting as well, because it helps those with certain conditions, so like, as I understand it, again, I'm not an expert, those with hearing impairments respond well to visual learning. Similarly, they also respond well to doing things kinesthetic type learning. Also, people with verbal impairments and dyslexia also respond well to visual learning. And I think it was interesting in Dame Ruth's kit bag, she had imagery and connectivity as part of a kit bag. So that to me ties in really well with some of the messages she's saying. So I guess what I'm saying there is that the whole sort of ethos around how our generation Z likes to learn it can be quite inclusive with those across the wider society. Of course, not everybody's the same. Everyone's different, and everyone has different learning styles. And as many of you are doing, and you gave the example for University of West Scotland, you're starting to deploy different types of technology to help the different sort of learning styles with individuals. So today you might be deploying things like campus Wi-Fi, you'll be putting out your virtual learning environments onto the internet, and also you might be doing things like video conferencing and audio conferencing, your lectures, etc. Although I have heard that typically within a lecture environment, all the students have their laptops and phones out. So there you go. But what I want to point out is really there's some great technology innovation that's really, really starting to become mainstream, as exemplified by the interest from Tech Factor. Obviously, we can't get into the details of all of that technology, but for me, there's three key themes. One is around visual themes, yeah. Another is around connectedness, and the other is around the use of artificial intelligence. So I think that's quite interesting in terms of what's developing. I also quite like the one at the top. I don't know if you can quite make it out. There's a little robot next to the desk. It's called robotic telepresence, and the idea of that, it gives a physical presence for those who are remote to be part of the classroom. And I've got a nephew in Singapore, and he suffers from a spinal muscular disease, which means he can't mix and interact with others, and he can't travel as much. And that sort of might give him the opportunity to perhaps have that inclusive and mixed environment and be part of the classroom. So again, I think technology has got quite an interesting role in terms of helping people like that. But I guess one of the key problems is that whilst our teenagers are consumers of technology, quite a lot of them, their knowledge is kind of screen deep. So I'm kind of worried about, do they have the right digital skills for the future? Because it could be a new form of exclusion, and I'll explain that in a minute. So there's also a bit of a misconception with some of our generations that they perhaps think technology is a bit geeky. It's not relevant, and it's a waste of time, it's too difficult. But actually, we need to recognize that technology is shaping our future world. There's some statistics up there in terms of how the jobs of the future are going to be like, what they're going to be like. And I think we need to encourage our children to have a really good understanding of technology, as well as science, maths, engineering, because without that, they're really at risk of not having the right foundations to give them the opportunities in the future world, and the social and financial benefits that will bring because of how the future job market will change. I think we need to help them to make sure that they have the right digital skills to make sure they're included as part of those opportunities. In today's modern society, technical digital skills is everywhere. It's a core part of what we need. Oh, blimey. So I just need to get my points. Okay. We need to make sure that they're ready for the new careers that will be in place in the future world. I think it's also important that technical literacy, in other words, understanding technology and being able to do things with it, has the same sort of prestige within our education system as reading, writing, and basic mathematics to enable them to be ready for the future. One of the things that we in BT are doing is we're trying to ingrain a culture of technical literacy. We have a target where we want to reach out to 5 million kids by the year 2020. And what we really want to do is harness the enthusiasm of young minds with regards to technology to make sure that technical literacy has the same foundation as things like English and maths, to make sure that they are ready for the future. So it's kind of a personal ask that I've got of all of you who work in education. So whilst I could have stood up today and give you a bit of a BT corporate pitch around the Connected Campus solution that we do for yourselves, how we work with 30 universities worldwide in many of our research programs to try and make the world a better place, how we're a purposeful business and we're passionate about a connected society and the benefits it would bring, and also how we support communities through our people and our technology. Oops, I've done it. But really, the key three asks that I have for you are these three. And let me explain my rationale. So the first one, obviously, you guys within higher education, you face tough times. We all know the headlines, the facts and the figures that are coming out, whether that's austerity, reduced budget, student debt, student acquisition, student retention, student satisfaction, whether that's the influence of politics. In the UK, it's things like Brexit, whether it's the globalization of the world, as well as some of the things we talked about in terms of digital. But for me, you need to take an outside-in approach. It's almost you're kind of thinking of your Generation Z students as your customers, and get inside, the why they want to come to university, and what's motivating them, what they want in terms of an outcome, and also how they want to learn. So we talked about our Generation Z's preferred learning styles. My view is that you continually need to embrace technology innovation. 'Cause for me, it helps to break down the barriers of diversity and inclusion within technology. And also, you need to think about how you can adopt technology to the next generation. If they are tech consumers, how you prepare them for the future, and how you use the power of communications to reach out to those who are excluded from the traditional campus experience. So I think, if we don't do that, we don't prepare our future generations for the future workplace. I think technology is shaping our world at an accelerated pace. And if we don't ingrain it as part of our education system, then we risk that our younger generation are excluded from the opportunities that the new world will bring. So for me, higher education has a role within the community to drive tech literacy. I think it's a shared challenge. If we don't crack it and work together, we can crack it, and if we all work together. Yeah. So I think our future generation needs to address their needs. We need to continuously integrate technology into the future education journey to make sure that they've got a brighter future. And then my punchline is: those higher education organisations that don't do it, well, they fail, become institutionalised, and possibly become relics of the past. Hopefully that's not too controversial, but thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. That was just fantastic. Just finished off again and kind of reinforced some of the messages coming from Dame Ruth's presentation. Before you nip off for coffee, and I'm sure colleagues who are running sessions in the next part of the agenda will just accommodate us running just a wee bit late. It was important just that we gave the speakers some time. I want to just take the opportunity to introduce our Principal and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Craig Mahoney, who, in partnership with Patrick, brought the conference to UWS. So, Craig, do you want to come up and say a few words?
I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday. I was at a colleague's wedding, so I missed all of yesterday's activity, but I've had some great feedback. Really, I won't keep you long before coffee. It's a delight for me, along with Patrick, Paul and our other colleagues here, to have this conference being hosted in the UK. In fact, for the first time ever being hosted outside of North America. So we're very proud of that. I apologise for the weather. I'm Australian, and at the moment Tasmania, where I come from, is having a warmer winter temperature than we are here in Paisley today, which is 11 degrees. So sorry that if you're feeling this a little bit brisk at the moment. This is our summer. And we welcome you now to go out there, enjoy some tea, coffee and biscuits and warm yourselves up. Thank you very much.
Okay, if you could just move out into tea, coffee being available, again, in the atrium and through in the hub. And tea and coffee is also available in the rooms. And we can welcome you back to this room for the next keynote after lunch. Just pay attention to your programmes. Thank you.